Hey, this is Brian. I'm here. I just want to point out a couple different ways to do all this stuff. So first off, I'm going to show you, I'm a little far away, but this is a drawing that's been Xeroxed. And one of the things that's really nice is when you work on with these kind of markers, the Xerox material is stable, and so you can color over. Here, let's just color this in, and it's not going to smear the marker. Now there is other brands. I'm just pointing this out because these brands, these are the art markers or something, Chart Pack. I think this is the one where it, no, actually these are okay. Never mind. Art markers will melt the toner and smear all over the place. And so what I do though is I make a couple Xeroxes. So I've got multiple copies of this, and this is a different card, but I start coloring in. Notice the green area here. I color in certain areas, and then after, because then I can just go out of the lines, then I take an X-Acto knife and I cut those pieces out, and I re-glue that all to one. This is just specifically for markers, so I'll glue this down to this car. And now notice all that over coloring on the green here gets covered up by this piece. And so I'll build up the whole car, like you notice I started coloring the frame in pink over here, and going out of the lines, and then I'll cut out those pieces. But if you go darker, sometimes you can manage, let's get that guy out of there. So I'm going from light to dark, so I might be able to get this covered up if I'm kind of careful about it. Nope, it's not gonna work. And using markers takes a little bit of control because you don't want to go out of the lines. In this case, I did, because I'm just doing these sweepy things. And so you can see I can get these really nice fades where I'm just working the marker, not worrying about the edges, because I'm gonna cut that out. So that's one method. Let's jump over to here. This is marker paper. You'll notice also that these kind of like Chart Pack markers will make you a little dizzy because it has a different alcohol base, or sorry, not alcohol, it's, I guess, toluene. If I color with this, you'll notice it gets a really, it's very saturated, and it fills in and it looks pretty uniform. And once that dries, I can actually do another layer. Whereas these Prismacolor markers, let's go over here. They work similar, but they're not quite as saturated. But at the same time, I can work that to my advantage and do some kind of shading with that, so I could really build up areas and let other areas kind of fade. So I have the ability to shade with those. Notice up here, usually what I do is I start with a blue color erase pencil. Where's the, there it is. And so if I were drawing my object, I draw really lightly, figure out the form, and the nice thing is I can erase this when it's all said and done. So then I'll go in and I'll ink that in, and this is going to be my new super product. It's called a can. And actually, let's go, sometimes I work backwards, and I'll do the thickest lines first, but remember we want 3 different line thicknesses. So in this case, let me test all 3 of these. That's almost the same, it's a little bit lighter. And this one is just about dead. So I'll go to this one. So a lot of times I'll just start with my outside line. So this is my thicker. And I actually probably want a little bit thicker than that, but, and you know, move your paper around for your optimal. I'm drawing really small right now, so I'm ending up pivoting on my wrist, which is not so good. You want to keep your hand kind of floating so that you can draw really nice. As long as if your hand's down, you're trying to draw oval, the bottom one always gets pinched, the bottom half of that, so it's a little flat. But if I lift my hand up, whoops, sorry, and draw without really touching paper, I'm just gliding across it, I can get much better oval sections. And it's good to know like where I can draw a curve this direction very easily because I'm following my elbow but drawing this reverse curve is a little harder. So don't be afraid to keep turning your page depending on what you're trying to draw. Let's go back to this now. Now I'm going to do something. I use a Bic. Keep on going off center here. Bic pens, because same deal. You can get these really light lines, and then you can build up and get really dark lines with one tool. So sometimes it's nice just to have one tool and be able to do the shading with it. If you work it really lightly, you can actually get some nice shading. Problem with this is that usually that same Bic pen, if we can zoom in right there, smears when I come over it with a marker. And so you have to build your order. If you're going to use a ballpoint pen, you do that after the color. And then I could come in and draw my pen lines. And right now that's still wet, so my pen is actually behaving slightly differently. I don't know what I'm drawing here, but so let's try shading that in. And then be careful too, sometimes this is kind of juicy and you can actually smear it if it hasn't dried just yet. Notice up here on the cube, let's redraw that over here. So first I start with my color erase, and I can kind of lightly box in, because I usually start whatever I'm doing with a cube or a box or something or other, rectangle, to figure out what the perspective is. And see, this is a little bit wrong, so I can fix that now before I get too far into this. And I'm just going to render in a cube right now. So like I said, a lot of times I'll actually go backwards, start with 5 minutes. Black. It's a little dangerous, but I start with my darker lines because I notice what happens is I end up drawing the whole thing and then going back in and darkening up some lines. So I'm basically drawing some lines twice. So in this case, I'm going to start with these really dark lines on the bottom because that's kind of going to represent the grounding of this. And that could turn this on the tip. And I'm going to do my outside line. I'm looking at the video and the paper at the same time. This is dangerous. And you know, everybody's got their different styles, but there's something really, when you draw a line with purpose and attitude, it really shows, as opposed to the kind of timid lines where you're kind of, you know, drawing something, you know, like this. You want some kind of speed in it. So a lot of times people will kind of hover and kind of do the passes, and then once they're confident, then they drop down and do this. And this is one thing where on a Wacom tablet, it's really hard to get the same line twice because you don't have the visual. So that's why sometimes drawing by hand is better. So on these little corners, I'm going to draw a very small radius on this. So I like to draw two separate lines that represent the beginning and the end of the radius. So the tighter those lines are together, they represent a smaller and smaller radius. So, and now this one, these blue lines don't quite come to this same corner, so I've already messed it up a little bit, but I'll try to adapt. And as Scott Robertson says, just, you know, like if you're off a little bit, don't correct the line, because that's gonna draw more attention to the fact that it wasn't quite right. Let's test that one. Yeah, it's a little dark. So I like to have some, I'm going to do like a little background kind of glow. Let's do this blue. So a lot of times I'll use kind of a bluish color for the background because it looks a little bit like sky. So you can kind of just assume that the blue is some sort of sky background. And the other thing is, like, I actually don't mind that this gets really gestural because it's just the background. And a lot of times I'll use those gesture lines to kind of indicate motion or like on a car, like almost like the smoke coming over the top of the car. All right, so that's helping to pop this, but I'm not going to do it on the bottom because I want it to kind of feel like it's sitting on a ground plane. Now I've got two different yellows, and so I'm going to build this all up with my light yellow first and then go to the darker yellow. So one of the things you want to think about in a cube is three different surfaces, and I think you guys all done this in DC1, but so this will be my lightest surface, second lightest, and third lightest, but what I really want is contrast between the edges. And so the way I achieve that is actually start with a diagonal, and notice my pen is starting to smear. So again, I should have done that last, but it's only the ballpoint. And I leave those little gap in those in between these surfaces white so that I can work the highlights in there. So now this one, I want contrast between these two. So if I started in the same corner and went out, I wouldn't get any contrast because those would be the same. So I'm going to start in this corner and see if, scoot over. And we're almost out of time. Ah. And see, it's hard to get light shades with, you know, markers, but whoops, I didn't mean to do that line right there because I don't want that contrast there. So I'm coming back in and just kind of, now see, this is where I already got this a little darker than this one, but that means I'll just have to go back in this one and do another layer. So and maybe I'll go to my one step darker. See if I can do this. And then I've got to go back and do a lightest surface on the top. And I'll test my mark over here. And again, I'm kind of fading this way so I can get some contrast in these edges. Now, I don't like the fact that those little blips over that pen, but I could clean that up in Photoshop now at this point. So there is a very, very quick marker sketch. But another, you know, beyond the surface changes, and we're just about out of time, make sure you have 3 different line weights. And in this case, I have a dark outline, and then I have a finer edge detail, and then if I had any features on here, let's say there was a square vent or something on this side, that might be a different line weight in itself. I don't know what that is, but also I've got a slightly darker line on the very bottom of things so that it can feel like it's grounded. Actually, I have one more. All right, I'm going to stop right there.